Hello, everyone, and welcome into the Go 24/7 podcast. Bryce Koon alongside Glenn West as we ramp up. For Glenn, what I am currently hearing from friends that are not LSU or Ole Miss fans, but are saying this is one of the most exciting games each and every single year to watch between these two teams. I know you, as an LSU grad, there's quite the rivalry between these two teams. I'm excited to experience it. Night game in Oxford this weekend, but man, LSU Ole Miss week. This means a lot for the Tiger fans.
Yeah, and we continue to check boxes off. I've never been to Oxford, never been to Ole Miss in that stadium before, so I'm certainly looking forward to it. Should be a good game. Should be a high scoring game. If I had to, I know we're getting ahead of ourselves here in the prediction part of things, but I think it's going to be an offensive oriented game again, and we'll see what happens. But there's a lot of interesting stuff to talk about with this matchup, and I think LSU's got a real good chance here to kind of continue some of the success they've had, particularly on the offensive side of the ball going forward.
I know Brian Kelly's not going to talk a lot about this, and especially with the media and probably the team because they don't want to pay attention to outside noise. But this game really does mean a lot here still early on in the season to be able to gain momentum and an upper hand in the SEC West race. We talked about LSU's 2-0. Ole Miss really doesn't have a lot of room for error after dropping the game to Alabama last weekend. And first off, what a tough back to back. You got to go to Alabama, then you host LSU the very next weekend. Not too fun, but Ole Miss fans are going to enjoy themselves this weekend. That being said, Glenn, we take a look at this LSU offense. One of the big question marks for me coming in is they played a complete game against Mississippi State. Now, I think that we can all take that not with a grain of salt. Mississippi State's still an SEC program, but it's just not up to par with the rest of the teams that they're going to play this season. About we'll say one drive in the first half, and then the entire second half, they looked just immaculate on offense. So the question I have here is, can the LSU offense put together a complete effort against a more formidable opponent? That seems to me to be kind of the next step this offense needs to show us.
Yeah, I think we're fixing to see, right? I mean, I don't know that we've seen them put together, a complete game against a team of this caliber yet. I mean, I think that there are certainly some holes that they're going to be able to plug into Ole Miss's defensive system, but we'll get a chance to see. I mean, I think the biggest thing that I want to continue to see with this offense is just continuing to lean into the aggressiveness with Jaden Daniels. I know we've hit that nail on the head for several weeks now, and that we've seen him do that for a couple of games in a row, and it's really opened things up. I mean, I think that they have really found something special with Brian Thomas and Malik Neighbors as kind of your 1-2 punch. You can mix in Anderson, Kyron Lacey, hopefully Chris Hilton maybe gets some more looks kind of going forward, but those three really seem to be connecting on a different level right now, and I think are probably the most formidable, kind of 1-2 punch in the SEC right now. I mean, is there anybody else that's kind of putting up those kind of numbers across the conference? So I think that this is going to be a really good test for LSU. You go on the road in a hostile environment. That crowd's going to be rowdy. I mean, we've known that. We've seen that kind of Ole Miss fandom really kind of have its way sometimes. And I think that LSU is going to be in a really strong position here to kind of make some stuff happen. And you're going to learn a lot about this team and just kind of what the future looks like kind of going forward here with a really key part of their schedule. I mean, we talked about it some last week, but I really think that this 3-game stretch here with Arkansas, at Ole Miss, and at Missouri is going to tell us a lot about just kind of where things stand in the West after these 3 weeks, how LSU factors into all of this. I think that they come out and they play the way that they did against Arkansas. I think they'll still win, but you also want to see that consistency carry over and not have the blemishes there of the first quarter and change of the second quarter. I just think that there's a lot of room for improvement here with the offense, and certainly the other angle here is the run game and trying to get Logan Diggs continue to have some success. I think Logan's really settled in here as your feature back, and it's been great progress through couple weeks here. I think he's done a really nice job kind of leading that room, working Caleb Jackson, Josh Williams, John Emery as you see fit. But I think they found a nice complement here with Diggs and the run game, and certainly what the offensive line's been doing and opening up holes. I think LSU's offense right now is probably cooking at another level from anybody else in the
Hmm.
SEC, and it's fun to watch. And we'll see if it can carry over though against another top 20 opponent here. Their second ranked opponent of the entire 2023 season.
And you mentioned too the run game. Obviously, Logan Diggs received the lion's share carries, 14 carries, I believe 96, 97 yards last weekend against Arkansas. That being said, Glenn, the question was asked to Kelly, it's more about the hot hand. They're going to ride that hot hand. Diggs has shown that. Behind him, look, you got to have more than just one guy be able to run it effectively in the SEC. Maybe where do you see this kind of heading in a game where I think you're going to have to be able to run the football effectively? What are some of those names that you personally want to see step up?
Yeah, and I think with some of the struggle that we've seen on defense, you want this offense to be on the field as much as possible. And I think that the
Mm,
best way to do that is certainly to have a balance between the run and the pass, and what Diggs can do for you in that respect. I'm very curious to see how they kind of work in some of these other backs. I mean, I think a lot of people have been pounding for Caleb Jackson to get a little bit more run. But I do think that there's something to be said that when you have a featured back and when you have a guy that that can get the job done for you, that's just a really tough guy to take off the field. I mean, that's just kind of where LSU's
mhm.
at right now. I don't think they are in a position where they want to have Logan Diggs sit for a couple of series so that they can work in some other players. I mean, I think he has to be a really consistent part of this rotation right now. I would like to see Josh Williams get more than just one carry. He had one carry for 41 yards in that game this last weekend. Would like to see him get a little bit more involved. Certainly, with what he can do in the passing game and the pass blocking part of it, it can't be overlooked. But yeah, I mean, look, if you're getting Logan Diggs 13, 14, 15 carries, using him out of the backfield a little bit, that's a great compliment to what LSU's been able to do down the field. And we talked with Logan yesterday on Tuesday in player interviews, and I asked the question, like, typically it's the run game that kind of sets up the passing game in some of these matchups. But um, I asked him just what does the aggressiveness of Jaden Daniels kind of taking those shots downfield, how does that open up the run game and on kind of the flip side? And he
Mm.
says it forces, defenses to make adjustments. It forces them to maybe play an extra guy in the back half of the defense. So the box is maybe a little bit less crowded for that run game to get going. So if LSU can continue to establish themselves, and if Jaden keeps taking those shots, I think it keeps a defense like Ole Miss. They have to respect it. And they have to, especially if Jaden's hitting on some of those passes, they're going to have to maybe tweak what they're thinking, and that can really open up things for the run game as well. So I do think that LSU is going to have a lot of ways they can kind of attack this Ole Miss defense. I think that um, Ole Miss hasn't played an offense like LSU's. I know they just played Alabama. I think LSU's offense has played a lot better than Alabama's. This season. I think that they're just on another level, really, from a lot of these other SEC teams, and it'll be interesting to see if they can carry that over in a tough, hostile place like this.
Yeah, you mentioned obviously Ole Miss's opponents: Mercer, Tulane, Georgia Tech, and then Alabama. So nothing to the caliber of what LSU can do offensively. Another note before we move on to the defensive side of the football: you mentioned I went back and watched a couple of looks when Thomas and Neighbors were open on the underneath route. A lot of times it was because Chris Hilton was either right up the seam or he was going downfield, opening up the underneath route. Which you kind of have to start thinking if defenses say we got to focus in on 11 and 8, that's going to leave 17 at some point wide open down the middle of the field because they're paying so much attention to Thomas and Neighbor. So it really is trending, it feels like, into some more complete,
Yeah, and
complete passing schemes.
yeah, and Jaden's got to see that, right? I mean,
Yeah.
we've seen him hit those balls to Thomas and certainly to Neighbors. Um, but last week, I think he only completed balls to maybe 4 or 5 guys total. I mean, that hasn't been typically what we've seen from him. Usually he's spreading the ball around to 8 or 9 guys in a game. So when teams are going to key in on Thomas and Neighbors, I think that those those complementary pieces, whether it's Hilton, whether it's Lacey or Anderson, those guys have to be ready. And Jaden's going to have to really go through his progressions and hit those guys for a couple passes to really keep the defense guessing on where he's going with the football. Because when you have two guys that are as good as Brian Thomas Jr. and Malik Neighbors have been, that's going to be the first thing they're on the scouting report. Just how do
Yeah.
we slow down that deep passing attack that they've been hitting on these last couple weeks, and this very well could open up an opportunity for a guy like Hilton to have a big game, have a couple big catches throughout the course of the game. So that'll be very interesting to see how that plays out.
It's a secondary for Ole Miss too, and defensive line that you can learn more about. We put out a podcast on Tuesday, talking with David Johnson, Inside the Rebels senior writer and publisher over there. Make sure you check him out, what he has going on, because it's obviously a big weekend. Let's talk defense here. Jackson Dart, look, this offense only scored 10 points, and David Johnson made the joke. It's like it feels like it's the first time in like 4 seasons that they haven't got into the 20s at least with what Ole Miss can do offensively. Quinshon Judkins, Jackson Dart, the weapons they've had, the playmaking ability of Dart running the football. It's not going to be KJ Jefferson-esque, 240, 250 pounds running at you. They're not going to face that again. That being said, this defense, I feel like, is going to have their work cut out for them. You kind of hinted this could be a shootout type of game. What do you need to see from this defense to let you know, hey, they're ready to play in this game against a potentially and a high-powered Ole Miss offense?
Yeah, I mean, look, we've talked with Brian Kelly a couple times already this week, and kind of a common theme from him has been maturity and wanting to see this team play with some more maturity. Right now, what I take away from that is that they're still trying to figure out fundamental wise just how they want to get this secondary playing up to par. I mean, the defense as a whole was it was very effective in the first half, I thought, for the most part, and kind of limiting Arkansas to some of their to some of their lower scoring drives, finishing it off with field goals instead of touchdowns. But as the game wore on, you could tell the front seven was getting a little bit frustrated by not being able to get KJ Jefferson to the ground. And certainly in the secondary, the zone coverage was really not was not what LSU needed in that game. They were losing eye discipline, losing focus. They gave up some really big plays down the field to wide open receivers. It felt like they had oceans of room to run. That can't carry on here against Ole Miss, because this is a really talented offense, like you just mentioned, with what Jackson Dart can do from a passing perspective. Quinshon Judkins hasn't had a really great start to the season. I know that there's been a little bit of frustration probably with how he hasn't been able to quite get it going. But he's come out this week and he's been very vocal about them wanting to get that going and establishing him as more of a force on this offense. So I really think they're going to try to lean into him early in this game. And he's certainly capable of being a really dynamic runner in the conference. We've seen it already before, but I'm going to be very interested to see just how the defense responds, especially in the secondary. Coach Kelly had a really interesting comment on Wednesday and in his little SEC teleconference update. He's talking about fundamentals, and it's alignment, it's tackling, it's leverage, it's assignments. Guys are kind of all over the place right now, and they really need this room, this secondary to kind of come together. I mean, Andre Stan's been a pretty steady force for you. I know he missed a couple tackles in that Arkansas game, and that's been a problem really throughout the entire defense. Has been kind of missed tackles and just not being able to get guys on the ground. But you really get a sense here that this secondary needs to have a strong performance, or at least a rebound kind of performance, some kind of bounce back, some kind of positive momentum that they can take going forward against a quality opponent like Ole Miss. And if you can get that from them this week, then I think you feel a lot better about kind of where things are trending for the defense as a whole. That being said, I expect this to be a pretty high scoring game. I don't know that LSU has a quick fix here. They've pretty much settled into a pretty consistent rotation in their secondary with Zai, certainly with what Andre Sam and Major Burns and Denver Harris, and you work in a little bit of Deuce Chestnut every once in a while. I think that you have to at least consider the possibility of playing a couple of the younger guys. Maybe give Ashton Stamps or LaTerrence Welch a couple snaps here if things aren't going well, just to try to mix it up. I mean, I don't know that you can come out and have another repeat performance like that and expect the offense to score on 6 straight drives and really carry you through the end of that game. I mean, that's just really it's gonna be really tough to do. And I think that
Yeah.
LSU's defense is gonna need to figure out a way to put 3, 4, 5 stops together against this Ole Miss offense. And how they do that, I think the easiest path to doing that is going to be trying to get at Jackson Dart, force him to be a thrower, force him out of the pocket, and potentially make some throws on the run. That's kind of the easiest path that I see to LSU having success is first off limiting what Jackson Dart can do with his legs, and then also slowing down Kinshawn Judson's, because I do think that they're going to try to use Judkins a lot this weekend.
Yeah, and you mentioned right here, wanted to point out two things. Up until this past weekend, Ole Miss was pretty good on third down conversions, but now they are 17 of 48, 35% conversion rate. You want to be able to get your defense off the field on third downs as well.
And that's been
And
an
another
area LSU
thing,
struggled in is getting
yeah,
off the field on third down. They've got to do a better job of that. I can't remember exactly what Arkansas did. I think they were, let's see, 8 of 13 on third downs last weekend. I mean, that's a pretty high percentage for third down conversions. That's got to be something LSU really improves on.
you also another thing too. LSU hasn't been dependent upon turnovers this year. I would like to see them force some turnovers in this game because I think
Yeah.
those are one big momentum shifting moments within a road environment that's going to be hostile. They haven't had to. The defense has been able to make stands where they need. Brian Kelly was very, vocal about that. Like, the resiliency, especially, after a costly, penalty or a costly play to be able to, or the fake field goal for them to be able to get the stop. Like that does speak a lot. And I like the fact they're not dependent on turnovers. I think that could be a dangerous game to play. But I'd like to see them kind of force some turnovers as well to see what they could do to be able to change the vibe, change the tune of this game as well. Ole Miss's offense, obviously, we talked about it. I mean, one of the tops in the country, even after a flat performance against Ole Miss or against Alabama, still averaging 7.3 yards per play. I mean, they hit on some explosive plays. Glenn, you touched on that. We're not going to be able to see I think as many explosive plays. I do think that the front seven for LSU has a chance here to really wreak some havoc. But man, if they start hitting on those, it could get ugly really quick, especially if the offense sputters there
Yeah,
in the
and look,
beginning.
Jordan Watkins and Dayton Wade, those are kind of the two guys at the receiver position that have really stood out early in this season for Ole Miss. They're not, I mean, I think this is kind of the matchup here for LSU secondary where they can kind of gain some confidence. These aren't
Mm,
the tallest or the tallest receivers. They're kind of more on pace with what LSU has in terms of size wise. I mean, talent wise, they're very talented. Don't get me wrong. I mean, they're going to be a handful to take care of
yeah,
this Saturday. But from a physique standpoint, LSU has played a lot of length, a lot of tall receivers in this season early on. This is going to be kind of one of those matchups where I think LSU kind of evens out from a physical standpoint, like in terms of just measurements and
yeah.
speed. And I'm going to be interested to see how the secondary responds in those kinds of situations because, I do think that, Watkins and Wade, and certainly I think there's one guy on there, I can't remember his name off the top of my head, who has like 5 touchdowns on 8 of his catches this year. He's a really deep play threat, a guy who averages like 23 or 24 yards a catch.
Trey
That's
Harris.
yeah, Trey Harris. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. He's going to be somebody that LSU is going to have to account for in the middle of the field. But I think that this is at least physique wise, length wise, a much better matchup for LSU to see if they can have some success against these Ole Miss receivers.
Yeah, it'll be interesting indeed. Let's get to the final portion of today's show, the final thoughts and predictions. Vegas had this one at about a 2.5 point odds spread last time I looked, Glenn. I mean, this is it's a tricky one, and it's going to be one where I think we have both made cases in this podcast of why LSU could go in there and win it, and there's a real cause for concern that if you don't start quickly offensively, and Ole Miss does, you may not have a chance to really get back into this football game. So, without further ado, you knock it out first. What are your thoughts and predictions on this football game?
Yeah, I think you just made a great point there. I think offensively you have to start fast. Like you can't have another performance here where you only have 3 points with 2 minutes to go in this first half. I mean, I don't see LSU being able to keep pace with Ole Miss in that respect. And so
Mm,
definitely want to see the offense get off to a fast start like they did against Mississippi State. Take that crowd out of the game early. Um, and I think that if they're able to do that, if Jaden's able to kind of carry over that second half performance, if Brian Thomas and Malik Neighbors are able to get cooking early, get Logan Diggs involved, I like LSU's chances in this one again. I think though it's going to be a very um, testy game. It's going to be a high scoring game. I would expect a lot of emotions and a lot of back and forth feelings on our board throughout the day on game day, just to see kind of how this one ultimately shakes out, but. I've got LSU winning. I think they get into the 40s offensively. I think it's a 41-35, 41-37 kind of
mm,
game. I mean, I just think that this is going to be a real offensive explosion for both teams. I mean, Ole Miss is going to be chomping at the bit. I mean, they just scored points last week against Alabama. They're going to come out and try fire away, and LSU's offense is going to have to try to really be able to match that. So I think it's going to be a very high scoring game. I think the over under right now is around 67. I would hit the over on that, to be honest with you. I think
mm.
that both those teams get into the 30s, and I could see one of them getting into the 40s and making this a really entertaining offensive game and maybe a little bit of an eyesore defensively for both teams.
Yeah, it's one that the defensive purists might not want to watch. I will say this. You mentioned kind of Ole Miss's defense and what they've been going through. They obviously got hit. They allowed Jalen Milroe in Alabama to really be explosive against them. That hasn't been the most explosive offense. I'll give a shout out to the former team I covered. Georgia Tech had over 300 yards passing against them as well. So back to back weeks, they've struggled in pass defense. South Carolina might lead the SEC in passing, Glenn, but I feel like LSU has been more dynamic and consistent in their passing game than the Gamecocks. That being said, I think that factors in that Jaden Daniels and them are going to be able, if willing to, and we see that aggressiveness, are going to be able to hit on some big passes. And I think Ole Miss is going to struggle offensively on third downs. That number coming off that Alabama game is really alarming. I think that LSU's front seven, we saw a lot of things. Deshaun Womack, I know he's not ready for the starting role, but I think that he's really going to be utilized, especially in some of those third and long situations, if they can force them into that. So I'm almost right there with you. I had a prediction. I'm going LSU 44, Ole Miss 32. I think that I don't know how they're going to get to 32, but I was going with that. I think that Ole Miss is a team that is going to be able to hit on some explosive plays, but I think that LSU is really going to be able to sit and manage this clock well. I think they're going to be able to, the ability to run the football is going to help them kind of, really just put a wear and tear on this Ole Miss defense. But I think that for the second straight year, the Tigers really kickstart their season against an Ole Miss team. Obviously, that was a game last year that really kind of put things into high gear for this team. I know the Florida game was a big one, but this, Ole Miss coming into Tiger Stadium last year, now going up there, it kind of kicks off this next three stretch of games where you're really going to learn a lot about your team. And I think that they're going to be able to get a win. So it's going to be a fun game, no doubt about it. Afternoon atmosphere into the evening down in or up in Oxford. I said down in Oxford. I think that's just a product of me
Up
living in
top,
Atlanta and
yeah.
everything kind of being to the south. But it is what it is. But
Managing the
it'll be a lot
clock
of
is
fun.
a good one. That's a
Yeah.
good point. Managing the clock, they're gonna have to do that to have success. I think offensively, you're gonna have to really control things at the line of scrimmage. Defensively, front seven, you're gonna have to be able to get after Jackson Dart some. He's not as big, obviously, as KJ Jefferson, but he's probably a little quicker. So how those guys are able to adjust and keep him in the box and not let him just kind of run free and really extend plays and find open receivers late into the snap clock or the late into the play is going to be really important for LSU's defense. And I think one guy that you hope to have a big game like that is Harold Perkins. I mean, I think you're
Yeah.
you're really hoping he can kind of use his speed and keep Dart from darting around, and we'll see what happens there. But I like LSU's shot to be able to put up some points and ultimately get a win this weekend.
It's going to be a fun one in Oxford, Mississippi. I believe it's a 6 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Central kickoff. there between the Rebels and the Tigers is going to be a lot of fun to watch as well. For Glenn West, my name is Bryce Koon. We appreciate you so much for tuning into our preview podcast. We're going to be talking a little bit more as the week goes on over on our website, Go 24/7. Make sure to check those out. Matchups to watch. Glenn had a good piece on 3 players to look out for this weekend. Make sure you get your subscription there. You can click a link down in the bio of this podcast, whether it's on YouTube, Spotify, Apple. We appreciate you for doing just that. We'll catch you next time here on the Go 24/7